Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Good morning. Welcome to day 4 this week of the good morning, everybody. The examination of the Brentwood local plan. My name is Mike Warden, and I'm one of the 2 inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to the soundness of the Brentwood local plan. Can I introduce my colleague inspector, Mrs. Von Wright?
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. Can I just introduce Annette? Most of you, I think all of you have met Annette.
Morning.
If you have any technical or procedural issues during today, then Annette will help you with them. So if you drop out or if anything happens that you're unsure of, then please take that up with Annette. We have a few people today who have not been at a previous session, so I'll just run through some housekeeping matters. I know that Annette has already been through some of these with you prior to the meeting starting, but please raise your hand. Use the raise your hand function if you wish to speak, and if we've not spotted your hand, then Annette will alert us to that. But so far that's worked very well. Please put your camera on when you're speaking. Don't have to, but it does help if that's possible. Please have your microphone muted when you're not speaking, and also if you've got any mobile phone on, please turn them off or put them to silent so that that's not going to disturb us. Can I please ask everyone to introduce themselves? I'm sure that we have everyone here who was supposed to be here, but if people can just introduce themselves, and we'll go through the list. And I'd like to start with the council, please.
Sir, good morning. My name is Paul Shedderevian, QC, acting for the council.
Good morning, Inspector Phil Drain, Director of Planning and Economy, Brentwood Council.
Good morning, Jonathan Quilter, Strategic Planning Manager at Brentwood Council.
Thank you. Is Mr. Fleming here?
Yes, hello, Simon Fleming, joint owner of Site 178.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. And for the Ursuline Sisters?
Yes, good morning, sir. John Dagg, barrister, instructed by JTS Partnership. Mr. James Govier of JTS is also in the meeting.
Thank you. For Essex County Council, please.
Good morning, Inspector. Brendan Johnson from Essex County Council, the local highway authority.
Thank you. Crudace Homes, please.
Good morning, Inspector. I'm Jane Piper from Baltimore Moor, representing Crudace.
Thank you. Hallam Land.
Morning, sir. It's Gary Stevens from Marins Planning, acting on behalf of Hallam Land Management.
Thank you. Countryside.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. Sam Hollingworth, Stratton Parker, on behalf of Countryside. I'm also joined by Mr. Glossop of Countryside Properties, so if you do have any detailed questions in respect of delivery, he may be able to assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For Redrow, please.
Morning, sir. Mark Furlonger, Temple Group, on behalf of Redrow.
Thank you. And for the Priest Lane Residents Association, please.
Hello, yes, it is Kate Webster representing the Residents Association.
Thank you very much. We'll have, we're dealing this morning with the Shenfield sites, and we shall focus on the 2 sites, land to the north of Shenfield and Priest Lane. 2 of the sites which are in the local plan have got planning permission, and I've just got some very brief points to raise at the end of the session in relation to those. But we shall start with land north of Shenfield and then move on to Priest Lane. Depending on how we go, we will take a break this morning, and when that happens, it will depend on how we get on. But normally, I would expect to have that break around about 11 o'clock. I shall be leading the sessions this morning, but Mrs. Wright is taking part and she may have some questions and some involvement in the discussion. Is there any questions on the procedural aspects of the morning? No. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just going to close my blind because the sun has now come out and I can't properly see you and you probably can't see me. Just one moment, please. Thank you. Sorry about that. Right, can I turn to the council, please, and please ask the council to introduce the site R03 land north of Shenfield, and can you please also explain briefly what are the exceptional reasons for exceptional circumstances that justify removal of this site from the Greenbelt?
Thank you, Inspector. So site R03, land north of Shenfield, it represents a 825 home scheme or allocation, to the north of Shenfield. It's situated just south of or adjoining junction 12 of the A12 and also the main road, the A1023 Chelmsford Road, runs past the site. We also have the railway line on the southeastern boundary that runs along the site as well. There are four main promoters of the site and obviously bringing forward the four parcels of the site. So we obviously have Countryside Properties land to the north, which is the elliptical shaped piece of land situated between Chelmsford Road and the A12. Red Row Homes have their parcel gets to the northwest of the railway line and to the south east of the Chelmsford Road. And then we have Crowdace Homes with their land a bit further south, again situated between the railway line and Chelmsford Road, and Stoneburn Properties, which is land adjoining Alexander Lane. In terms of the allocation, what's set out, as mentioned, obviously the quantum of development is 825 homes. There is also the identified need for the provision of a co-located primary school, an early years and childcare nursery. And as set out in the policy, land of 2.1 hectares is required for that. There is also the provision for a residential care home and also the provision of 5% self and custom build. In addition to that, there's the 2 hectares of employment land. And obviously, with the part of the proposal is a requirement to bring forward this in a comprehensive manner through a master plan approach. In terms of the exceptional circumstances, so the residential development at the site, it was assessed in the Greenbelt study as having a moderate impact in terms of achieving Greenbelt purposes overall. There would be a limited perception in terms of urban sprawl as a result of the release of the site for development, as the site itself shares characteristics with the existing urban form and wider countryside. Release of this site for development would not result in development extending further east than the railway line or further north and west due to the A12 and Chelmsford Road A23. So those representing strong boundary features which already limit the openness of the site. So we feel that these particular specific local level characteristics are a factor that justifies the selection of these sites for release from the Greenbelt.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter. And in the Greenbelt study, what was how was the site categorised in terms of its impact on the Greenbelt?
So overall, it was in terms of the Greenbelt study, it was a moderate impact, but there was considered to be, in terms of the openness, that it's well contained site, which is obviously bounded by strong boundary features.
Thank you. For those people here today who are not at any of the sessions this week, what we will be doing as inspectors is asking the council to provide some further information relating to exceptional circumstances for each of the sites that's been proposed to take out the green belt. So that is information that we will be requiring the council to submit to the examination. Mr. Hollingsworth, sorry.
Thank you, sir. So apologies, but based on what you just said there, this may be a point for another time, but I just wanted to very briefly state very, very grateful for Mr. Quilter's detailed description of as to why this site doesn't make an important contribution to the purpose of the green belt. But of course, as we know from judgment in case of Calverton, if I can use that shorthand, there are other factors that the local planning authority may take into account, and in this instance our view is that the scale of the objectively assessed development need, the lack of opportunities to meet that without impinging on the green belt, together with the sustainability of this site, going beyond and above the factors that Mr. Quilt has raised, all contribute to the exceptional circumstances that justify this site's release. But I appreciate, so there may be opportunity to discuss that in further detail once the council have provided this paper to you and Mr. Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollingworth. Could I ask Mr. Coulter just about the boundaries, so I'm clear about what the boundary is of the site that we're dealing with, and the boundaries that relate to release on the green belt. Is the boundaries shown in the green belt topic paper? Is that the most up-to-date boundary in terms of proposed release from the green belt, the detailed boundary?
Yes, that's correct, Inspector. Yes.
So, can you just tell me just a little bit about the boundary as it relates to the area around the school, the Shenfield High School? I presume that just is reflecting the existing greenbelt boundary currently, that rather jagged arrangement around the school. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so effectively the greenbelt boundary as it stands now is following that same line. So with this proposed release as part of the allocation, if that wasn't to be included, i.e. the school playing field land, then obviously that would be an island of greenbelt surrounded by urban forms. So it was a point of obviously making sure that we're not left with an isolated area of greenbelt.
Thank you. And could you just explain the boundary along the northwestern side, and also the boundary as it close to the junction with the road up at the top, at the back of the houses, near the roundabout. The boundary kicks in, which I presume is along the road. Can you just explain that boundary?
Sorry, get myself off mute there. Yeah, in terms of the specifics of those parts of the boundary, I think in terms of the junction, I think it's a case that's been drawn around the junction. I think it may make more sense for that to be sort of brought across. I think in broad terms, obviously, again, in theory, I suppose I think the original allocation didn't include the road, for example. Obviously, that would then mean that the two parcels were separated. I think from our point of view, it was just trying to make sure that obviously the boundary followed a logical line. I think with regards to the northwestern corner, that's again bringing in the road, and there's the obviously bringing in at the end of that the elliptical piece of land. Obviously that parcel there, that's sort of the line that comes across up to the edge of the A12 and then follows the line of the A12 at that point. I think in terms of obviously just trying to keep them as neat as possible, that's obviously where we feel that's the appropriate line to draw. But we're happy to have a look at that in more detail if that's felt that that's potentially not appropriate. But I think it's, in our view, it's still sensible to have the line in that place, because no development necessarily would take place on the junction, for example, anyway, if we're talking about junction 12.
Yes. Okay. And the houses the ribbon houses that run along the road, they are within the green belt currently. What is the reason as to why they're in the allocation?
So again, it's from the perspective of if the ecliptical piece of land and the other parcels to the rear of those properties along Chelmsford Road were removed, and the existing properties weren't, then of course they would be left as an isolated area of greenbelt in that respect. I think that in terms of the purposes of the greenbelt, obviously we would expect that those would form part of the urban area, obviously the whole area being released, and certainly that would be our expectation. That would be a sensible approach, to take those existing properties out of the greenbelt as part of this overall allocation, not with the intention obviously of any particular development taking place, but there's certainly just from the point of view of release of greenbelt strategically, that would be necessary.
And you consider that's justified in terms of greenbelt policy?
Yes.
Does the inclusion of those properties within the allocation have effectively, are there any implications of including those properties within the allocation in respect of applying the policy in the future?
What, in terms of bringing forward the proposed allocation itself?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
No, I don't believe that would cause an impact upon the allocation by including them within the boundary of the site, because obviously the properties themselves are under separate ownership. Obviously, individual owners of private properties, but in terms of the actual, like I say, the release of greenbelt in this location, it's sensible to include that as part of the overall boundary. And also consideration of those sites as part of any master planning work is also part of that as well. So,
but did you consider excluding them from the allocation, and having effectively that elliptical part of the site of the allocation as separate?
Well, I mean, in terms of how the site has been formed, obviously it does comprise all those parcels, and we consider that as one entity, because in terms of actually bringing forward the strategic development, all of those, for example, would contribute towards the need for the new school, and so that's again a requirement from our point of view of those parcels being considered together in terms of the overall requirements for that site, bringing it forward. So in our view, we wouldn't want to exclude the ecliptical piece of land as a separate allocation, for example. By all means, obviously, in terms of as the plan's been prepared, they have obviously been promoted as individual sites, but in terms of how the final allocation has been brought together, there's been a consideration of making sure that's a single entity.
Thank you. I just cut out there. I'm sorry. So does the inclusion of those properties within the allocation in respect of how the policy and the particular criteria within the policy would apply to that area, does that provide any confusion or lack of clarity to existing properties within the allocation on that road?
No, I don't. Obviously, we're not expecting those properties to, if they're going to be bringing forward.
Mr. Coulter, on mute, I think.
Oh, I didn't think I was. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Is it just me, or can I can't hear you, Mr. Coulter? Can other people hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, I think he's gone.
He's just coming back into the meeting. If everyone just hang on a second, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Can people hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Sorry, I dropped out. I'm sorry, Mr. Coulter. You probably answered my question very eloquently, and I didn't hear it. I'm very, very sorry.
No, don't apologise. That's fine. So apologies. I can't recall the question now. What was it in terms of how the?
It was about what the implications are for the existing housing development along the road in being part of the allocation that is subject to policy R03.
No, I don't think it would have an impact on them. Obviously, we're talking about strategic level development. These are individual properties. If they were to bring forward, for example, an individual application to, I don't know, demolish the house or extend, I don't believe that this would impact upon that. Other policies would still apply.
Thank you.
So I think the key issue is that the existence of those properties is not going to affect the application of the policy and fulfilment of its requirements.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Coulter how then you've arrived at, just give me some, and it may be that we might need to bring in some other promoters here. How have you arrived at the capacity of the site as being 825?
Certainly, I can start on that, and I'm happy for the promoters to come in. In terms of the overall quantum, obviously, as the plan has advanced in terms of previous versions, and I think the key document would be the 2018 preferred site allocations, where we was obviously at that point in time, as I mentioned in previous sessions, looking at an uplift at that time in our objectively assessed needs, and we're looking at additional options. Prior to that, we had the 2016 plan, which identified the parcel that's being brought forward by Crowdace Homes, and then we obviously that widened in terms of the further areas that are being promoted at that particular time. So the quantum in itself is effectively an amalgamation of those promoted sites, and again I would say a point to the statements of common ground more recently that again further confirm that those numbers are correct in terms of the total quantum, but I'm happy for others to come in on providing a bit more detail.
If it helps, so just to clarify that the amount that the 4 developers can bring amounts to in total just over 36 hectares. So that is not including the Brentwood Council open space that's at the south of the site, or that's allocated at Shenfield High School. So it is just the 4 house builders, so Crowdace, Red Row, Countryside and Stonebond. So that totals just over 36 hectares. And then obviously if you calculate that down, then in terms of the other requirements for the site in terms of open space, then you can get to 825 comfortably.
Are there is there anybody else who wishes to comment on that, on the capacity of the site? Mr. Hollingworth.
I think so. All I can really add is to agree with Ms. Piper there, and just also to note that the policy does refer to approximately 825 as well. So it does have that necessary flexibility, but as Ms. Piper's explained, the various promoters have looked into the capacity, have looked into that in detail. Technical work has been undertaken, and we're very comfortable that there aren't any significant constraints on the site. In fact, there are very few constraints at all, and the 825 figure is very much deliverable. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I? I'll come on to site constraints in a moment, but can I ask the statements of common ground now suggest knocking the trajectory back 2 years, but keeping the end date the same. So it would be an 8-year delivery timescale instead of 10. Is that correct?
Yes, Inspector, that is correct. I'll let site promoters come on to that. But yeah, in the view of the promoters, obviously we are talking about a consortium of 4 developers bringing forward their respective parcels, and in terms of that, there could be a concurrent development in terms of those annual figures, and that's felt achievable. But I'll let others to come in on that as well.
Please.
Okay, thank you, sir. So yeah, we looked at the latest trajectory, and obviously as the plan has gone on, the first couple of years did seem a bit difficult, considering that the time frame we're considering for the adoption of the local plan. But work has been done, and obviously has been done for years, actually, by Crowdace since about 2010, and then others have joined more recently. But the work, we have been working together as a statement of common ground, and there is a memorandum of understanding between the developers also to work together to create the master plan and phasing that's required. But there is a lot of technical work that has been done, including ecology, transport, landscape, a whole raft of stuff, noise, ecology, sorry, I said that, heritage, and flooding, drainage. So all that is underway, and we are soon to be in a position to submit screening on Crowdace's land, and maybe the others coming forward too. So we are looking to submit an application as soon as possible after adoption. Clearly, with the house builders, we do need an element of certainty to commit to doing further work. But we're all the developers are now feeling that they're in a position to do that, having liaised with the council over the last few months, in particular with the statement of common ground. So yeah, very much looking forward to getting on and delivering. So that has had an effect in the early years of the trajectory, but given that there are 4 very experienced developers on here, then we do feel that the 5-year land supply will still remain, even though it's cut off at the beginning, because obviously we can get going concurrently on the site. In terms of the 8-year programme, that is actually very conservative and allows for flexibility and fluctuations as the site progresses in terms of sales of properties. So the chances are it will finish sooner, but for the purposes of this local plan, we've left it at the 8 years to give that flexibility and to give the council certainty of when the numbers will come forward.
Thank you. I just want to, I'll come on to the delivery over the time period in a moment. But can I just understand what the position is in terms of site effectively preparation for an application? You've mentioned that a number of surveys have been undertaken, but how is it envisaged that the site would be brought forward at planning application stage, and in terms of its delivery? Is there, for example, a consortium type of agreement between the house builders? Can someone please tell me where we are with that site preparation? Is it envisaged that there will be one outline application for the whole allocation, or would it be separate parcels, etc.?
Okay. There is a memorandum of understanding between the developers. It's not going to be done in a true consortium style, but obviously everybody is working together and committed to taking it forward. The understanding is that all 4 developers will come forward separately. They all have their own access. They all have that ability to come at their own point in time. There is some discussion, obviously, depending on the size of the sites, as to whether they'll be outline or full or even hybrid. So that's still being discussed, and obviously will be discussed with the council as we go forward. But the premise is that everybody's working to getting an application in as soon as possible after adoption. So all four are working towards that and can come forward separately. So that's why there's an ability to actually provide some higher numbers up front in the first 5 years, which allow, because of the separate access, and nobody's reliant on anybody else.
So what are the key pieces of infrastructure that will need to go in before or early on in the delivery of the site?
There isn't anything that needs to be done before the site, as far as I'm aware. The infrastructure really is about getting access into the site. The main bit of road infrastructure will come as a realignment of Alexander Lane to the south, and which will help at some point stop that up to allow much safer access between Shenfield High School buildings and their playing fields to the north of Alexander Lane. But that will come as part of the first phases of development. The other major element is the school, and that will be discussed with the education authorities to when that is brought forward. But clearly, like most developments, it will have to have some number of students being produced by this development and others to make it worthwhile opening. So we have to still, although the principal and the area of search is looked at, we do need to work with the education authority to understand the timing of that as we go through the application process.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of questions about the school in a moment. So in terms of the site is in a number of different ownerships, and it is envisaged that those house builders who own those sites will be taking their own parcels forward. You don't yet know whether that will be in separate applications, but it may well be.
Yeah.
And it may be some combinations of outline and full.
Yeah, there is certainty that there will be separate applications. There will not be one single outline. They will come in a variety of different guises. They might be hybrid and full or outline, but they will all come forward virtually at a similar time frame. They will all be formed within the comprehensive master plan, which is being evolved. So at the end of, at the back of the section, the statement of common ground, there is a high level master plan.
Yep.
That's been done for the purposes of the local plan. But then when we, as we move forward together, that master plan will evolve, and the applications, the individual applications, will follow from that, as there will be also a phasing plan as well as to how the sites how the site as a whole gets developed. That's quite important, obviously, for things like the school.
Mr. Sherdavian, you had your hand up, but you've taken it down again.
I have because Ms. Piper has actually covered the point I was going to make, that the policy itself requires the submission of a master plan and phasing arrangements. So notwithstanding the manner in which the individual developers might choose to bring elements of the site forward, it has to conform to the master plan and the phasing strategy, so that the local planning authority will have control over the way in which the site is developed and brought forward.
So is there any, in terms of how the different ownership parcels of the site and different expectations in terms of those elements will be taken forward, what is envisaged in terms of, is there any particular part of the site that is more advanced in other parts in terms of that planning, and therefore more likely to come forward?
I think there are a couple of different elements to that. The land that Stonebond have in the southeast part of the site is quite small and discrete, so that can come forward relatively quickly. For example, that's unlikely to require EIA. The Crowdace land, as I said, we've been working on this site for a number of years, and we're well advanced with the majority of, well, all of the technical studies, so that so we can bring that forward as soon as the plan is adopted, and obviously the land is taken out of the greenbelt.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, sir. I don't want to interrupt your train of questions, but I do have a comment on the start date and the trajectory. Is now a good time, or do you want me to wait till you finish your line of questions?
I've got some questions on that, which I'm coming on to, but please feel free to then come in on the back of that, Mr. Stevens.
Okay, thank you.
In looking at the, I'm looking at whether the evidence would support a 2023-24 start date. Well, 125 houses being delivered in 23-24. So two elements of my question is about does the evidence support that houses would start to be delivered by 2023 on the site, given that it's a greenbelt site, and if it was released from the greenbelt, then then that would trigger, as you say, a planning application to come in on the adoption of the local plan. But although you've indicated that there's some fair degree of technical work gone on the site, there are things like some more detailed master planning that you referred to. There'll be pre-application consultation with the local community, and then submission of an application, determining if that application, resolution of the legal agreements, etc. Why is 23-24 a reasonable start date, given all that work that would need to be done?
Right. So if I take that, the way this is being worked through is that we will be spending the rest of this year doing a lot of the pre-application work with the officers at Brentwood, and also the technical evidence that's required, EA screening, scoping, and working up that master plan. And in parallel with that, obviously working up the detailed applications, whatever that they may be. What will happen is if you take, I'll give you some examples. So if you take the Stonebond site, they can easily come in with a full application because it's a relatively contained site, as I said, and quite small. And they have good experience of delivering about 20 units in that sort of first year. So a year on, basically, from when we can. Sorry, I should also say that this does assume that the local plan is adopted at the end of this year. So then by the time that we get an application in, they should be able to get on and sort the site out and get those houses built within that time frame. Crowdace also has a good experience recently in Didcot on a very similar sized site, and had 50 units in the first year. So we're assuming that there's a year for work, and that's most likely to be a hybrid to allow for the first phase of about 50 units to come forward. And then equally, Countryside have experience on their similar size sites to theirs that would produce 50 in the first year. So I haven't got the figures for Redrow, but if that's added up, then that gives capacity for Redrow to come through for a mere 5 units. So obviously there is some give in that first year in terms of all 4 developers, major developers coming forward and delivering. And obviously, there will be the affordable housing element in there as well.
So that would be 50 units for Crudace and for Countryside. That is 50 over a 12-month period. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's from evidence that they've produced on other sites. So Crudace was at Didcot, and then Countryside was at a number of sites. I'm just trying to find it. So they had a site at that produced those sorts of numbers at Mile End and at Bewley. But what I would say also is a couple of things. One, obviously, this area has not seen a lot of new house building for quite some time, so there is expected demand for that. But also, these figures that I'm quoting have included last year with COVID as well. So that's obviously affected certainly the total number of units, and yet those numbers are still coming forward because of the demand.
So those 125 units, would they be of a similar product?
There will be a differential in the product just by the very nature that it's for different house builders. So I think that will be part of the discussion as to what is going to come forward at the same time. That's why in the overall trajectory there is some flexibility to allow for that. But that the amount of detail in terms of mix and type hasn't been gone through yet. But that's definitely something that the developers are very mindful of, and making sure, obviously, they don't want to put themselves in competition at the same time. So that will be considered.
And in terms of points of access, what is envisaged about, for example, the Crudace site? Would that 50 that you're proposing for the first year, would that be off one access point, presumably off Chelmsford Road?
We haven't got to that stage yet, sir, but yes, the chances are yes, that's where it'll come from.
I've got some further questions on the trajectory as we go through, but I'd like to bring in Mr. Hollingworth, please, who's had his hand up, and then maybe it might be an appropriate point to bring in Mr. Stevens. Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. My points were going to be on the trajectory, so I didn't know if you wanted to ask your question first, or if you, it's appropriate for me to make my points now.
Please make them now, and we'll.
Okay, thank you. So clearly, so the two key elements to this are the lead-in time and the delivery rates. And in terms of the lead-in time, you'll see that the first completions on the 125 isn't anticipated until 2023-24. Now, Countryside are seeking to make a planning application by the end of 2021, and that does leave a considerable lead-in time between a planning application and completions, particularly when one considers, as Piper has explained, that it's not a case that the developers here are sitting on their hands and merely waiting for the local plan to be adopted. There is considerable technical work being undertaken in the background, indeed already has been undertaken, to gear up for a planning application. There is potential, of course, for that planning application to be made before the local plan is formally adopted. That is an option available. Elsewhere, for example, the planning performance agreement's been in place such that the application won't be determined until the plan is adopted, but that does allow a lot of the technical considerations to be considered. So I think that the lead-in time element is very conservative. And then secondly, in terms of the delivery rate, again, that is very conservative. Countryside's parcel, our contributions to that 125 figure is, as Ms. Piper explained, was 50 dwellings. That is considerably fewer dwellings than has been delivered by Countryside on comparative sites. within the locality, including, as Piper explained, in Bewley. So again, I just wanted to emphasise that in reality that figure could be quite vastly exceeded in that year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingworth. So Countryside build out more than 50 units per year on a site in the first year.
That's certainly potential, sir. Yes. If it would assist, I do have Mr. Glossop with me, who can discuss the detailed delivery rates on other sites. As I mentioned, they do vastly exceed 50 on sites of a similar nature within the locality. I don't know whether that's a level of detail.
If it would just help, though, to answer my question, that might be useful. I'm aware Mr. Stevens is waiting as well, but if you could bring in Mr. Glossop now, that'd be helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Inspector. Yeah, just on that point, Countryside have produced various bits of evidence looking at delivery rates on 4 of our sites that have been delivered over the last 4 years. These include sites in Chelmsford, in Runwell, in Bewley, another one at Hospital Approach, and one in Mile End as well. For example, the Mile End case, this was just a small development of 95 units, and that was actually delivered in the first year. Looking at, in terms of the delivery rates that we've provided, we've assumed 50 units per year from the first year to deliver our element of the site within the first 3 years. And certainly that has been averaged off rather than coming up with specific unit numbers for each year. But we certainly expect that we could deliver close to 50 in the first year. I know Ms. Piper referred to a site which we've recently completed over the financial year 2020-2021, and we delivered 40 units in that year and have been quite heavily affected by COVID, where we've only actually been at 75% capacity. So we certainly feel that 50 units per year would be achievable. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask why, when the council put forward a revised housing trajectory in November, and that trajectory had a more graded delivery trajectory, I think, I'm just checking, starting off at 30 houses in the first year. So there's a significant change from 30 to 125. Can I just ask what that change is, and why the sorts of figures that are now in the statement of common ground were not put forward in that trajectory in November?
Certainly. I think what has happened with the passage of time and the delay to the local plan, we felt that we weren't necessarily able to achieve delivery rates in accordance with the original trajectory. I think it would be fair to say that the original trajectory was just an averaged out estimate that was fairly conservative. I think what has happened since then, and through the passage of time, is the developer group has sought to do additional work in relation to delivery rates, and the new trajectory has been informed by a significant amount more evidence than the original trajectory which had been produced. Thank you.
And Mr. Glossop, that evidence what comprises that evidence that has informed the figures between November and now?
So that evidence has basically been a review over all of the sites that Countryside has delivered over the last 4 years, and I believe the other developer groups have also looked at their delivery rates over recent schemes, and including how much we're able to deliver in the first year, and in effect that has resulted in the new trajectory.
If I could add to that, sir, there's also been, as we've worked together and with the council, an amalgamation and an understanding of the technical work that's been undertaken. And obviously, as we've got more more certainty with discussions, not only with Brentwood Council, but obviously with the Education Authority and the Highways Authority, we've been able to have a constant review of how we're going to move forward, and obviously discussing the Statement of Common Ground has led to discussions about PPAs and screening and those matters, and an understanding of when the local plan may be adopted. That gives us that certainty to proceed going forward as a group.
Thank you. Is there a PPA in place?
Not yet, sir. No.
And does that apply for all of the site, not just Kudos?
I think that we are anticipating that there will be a PPA for each, and how we proceed obviously depends on how we come together and it will be very quick to finalise the overall master plan and the phasing, and then that will feed into all 4 PPAs. So there is an element of consistency and understanding as we move from sort of a policy discussion into development management.
Just one minor question before I invite Mr. Stevens to make his points. You mentioned the Stone Bond, who have a small parcel of land off Alexander Lane. There's reference in the evidence to realignment of Alexander Lane. Does the bringing forward of that Stone Bond parcel rely upon work to realign Alexander Lane?
No, sir. If I could point you to the master plan that's at the back of the Statement of Common Ground with Brentwood Council, you will see. In fairness, it's not very defined, but there is a dotted black line that goes across Alexander Lane, Alexander Lane, right to the east of the pink land, the Shenfield High School land. Don't know. Can you see the black dotted line that crosses? Right. Yeah. So that's a rough idea of where the indicative stopping up point could be. The Stone Bond land is further to the east. It's the most eastern parcel of this RO3 allocation, and you'll see there's a red indicative proposed vehicle access point there. And you'll also see, as I might as well just highlight them, that the one in between the stopping up point and the Stone Bond is one of the accesses to Crodace land. But if you follow the road to Chelmsford, if you're going north, there's another access point there, which will be the main access to the Crodace land. And then you've got accesses onto the countryside land, and also the one from Chelmsford Road to the Redrose site as well. So that's where they all get their individual access points from.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, this might be an appropriate time for you to make your comments.
Thank you, sir. And I'd just sort of say to start that, we don't object to the allocation or the principle of the allocation. Our concerns are solely in relation to the trajectory for the site. If I could perhaps start with the start date then for first completions, which is be given as April 2023. Planning application to be submitted by the end of this year with the adoption plan seems sensible, but what that leaves then, sir, is from the end of this year, so end of 2021, it leaves approximately a 15-month window between the submission of the applications and the first completions at April 2023. And in those 15 months, the applications obviously will be processed and determined. The Section 106 agreements obviously need to be resolved. We know there's no collaboration agreement, so there clearly will need to be some discussions as to the proportionment of contributions between the parties. I'm not clear, sir, whether the house builders are the owners of the land or whether they have option agreements, but clearly if they only have option agreements, then there's a period of process of negotiation with the landowners as to the purchase of those land, which can take time. Then we obviously have discharge of pre-commencement conditions, reserve matters, obviously, if they are outline applications to be addressed. They all require access, obviously, onto the public highway, so Section 278 agreements will be required with the Highway Authority, and then obviously works to construct the access to be undertaken. Then obviously groundworks construction. We note that obviously the A12 and the railway line are adjacent to the site. There may well be noise attenuation measures that are required to be constructed prior to first occupations on any of the sites. And obviously then the completions, the construction of the homes and completions. In our experience, to do all that within 15 months is extremely tight, and we would say is unrealistic, and a more cautious approach should be adopted for the start date for completions on this site, given the amount of work that's required to be done post submission of the planning applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Piper.
Thank you, sir. Just to come back on a couple of those, it's not 15 months. I think that's we need to re-emphasise, obviously, that we have this forthcoming 10, 11 months from the rest of this year to do the pre-application work and to get a lot of those ducks in a row. So it is perfectly possible to get everything sorted, and obviously bearing in mind the urgency that Brentwood want to bring this forward, we would be expecting them to work hand in hand with us, hence the PPAs and going forward. But in terms of pre-commencement conditions, obviously we would work towards minimising those through our negotiations and the pre-app work and consultations we'll do with statutory consultees, for example. But also in terms of Section 106, there is no reason why this any of the applications can't go to committee for a resolution for the Section 106 to be signed the next day. So I think that the ambition is to and that certainly the want from the developers is to do all of that in advance to minimise the post-submission time frame, and certainly that's something that I'm personally involved in on other sites where pre-commencement is done. Pre-commencement work and submissions are done so that doesn't hold up things, and Section 106s can be signed virtually the next day after a resolution. So I think that's where we're coming from. I think from our point of view, from a developer's point of view, what's key is getting the land out of the greenbelt and getting an early adoption, earliest possible adoption, to allow these sites to come forward in order to contribute to the 5-year land supply. I think the worry from us, particularly from Crowdays, having worked on this site for so long, is further delays that might come forward, for example, by looking at other sites needed. So we, as I've said in other representations to this examination, that we would be looking to get this site going as quickly as possible, and if that means a reduced local plan period, a reduced housing number in total, then something is better than nothing. And we can certainly bring this forward, as we've shown through the Memorandum of Understanding and the statements of common ground.
Thank you, Ms. Piper. Also, Mr. Stevens raised the question about ownership, and could you just clarify for me the position on ownership?
Crowdace is option. I believe Redrow and Countryside are option 2, but maybe Mr. Hollingworth could confirm that. And Stone Bond, I'm not sure. So.
Thank you, Ms. Piper. Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. I think, well, firstly, just to not much to I can add to what Ms. Piper has said about the delivery trajectory or the basis a good point is a good point, regardless of how many times it's made. I won't repeat what Ms. Piper's just said, but in terms of the option agreement, yeah, I can confirm that the Countryside's interests relate to land under option as well.
Thank you. Mr. Furlonger, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. Just to confirm that Red Rose is an option 2. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the revised trajectory within the Statement of Common Ground, we've looked at the lead-in time, and we've looked at the delivery within 23-24. But can you please just help me with what evidence points to be what is 175 in year 2 and 170 in year 3, and I'm interested to know why the site would peak quite early in its development at that level and then tail off.
Shall I take that, sir?
If you can help me, that'd be great.
Yes, certainly. Right. So the reason for that is pretty much the way that the land is broken down in terms of its size and the numbers of units that will come off each one. So, for example, if I start with the smaller ones, Stonebond will be complete in 2 years. So that will add to the second year peak. Crowdace will consider that they will go up to 80 in that in 24-25. And Countryside equally will have a number that increases from 50. So, and obviously Red Road equally. So they will build up to that. The reason it starts to go down after in 26-27 is purely because some of the sites are small and they will be done by then. So there is an earlier peak because you have 4 developers operating and getting the maximum out in the early parts of the programme.
Mr. Hollingworth.
Apologies, sir. I've just taken my hand down because Ms. Piper had actually covered exactly what I was going to say, so I won't repeat what she just said.
Thank you. So just picking up a point I made earlier about the lead-in time and the early years delivery. What has changed to effectively condense the delivery of this site in a shorter period of time to that which was put forward by the council in November?
I think it's just as Mr. Glossop said earlier, it is a case of the fact that the developers have had much more involvement in the creation of this trajectory, and that they have been looking at the site in terms of their own business and wanting to crack on with it and get going as quickly as possible. So that's by looking at that and having a concerted effort to see how we can help with the trajectory and help the council move forward as soon as possible, and also obviously from a business point of view create the development they want and that they can sell, then that's why it's shifted and sort of concertinaed. But as Mr. Glossop said, that is well evidenced, even given last year's and the COVID implications of delivering development.
Thank you. Is it expected that the house builders would see out the delivery of their own areas themselves, or sell off part of their holding to other house builders not currently involved?
Given the size of each of the parcels, then I think they will all be holding on to their sites and developing. But obviously what you have to take into account is it's almost like looking at 4 different separate allocations. So once the master plan is done, and we're almost agreed on that, then it's almost like for other independent allocations, so they can all come forward independently, but whilst obviously ensuring that the policy is fulfilled. I forgot my point now. Sorry.
Well, would you like a moment? Mr. Hollingworth has got his hand up. So
thank you.
Bring Mr. Hollingworth in, and if you think of it, Ms. Piper, then please say, Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, and I will try and make this take as long as possible to make this point to give Ms. Piper the time. But no, it was just very briefly to confirm that Countryside would be delivering their parcel themselves. Again, as Ms. Piper said, it's a very small scale site for a developer of Countryside's characteristics. It's very comfortably deliver that themselves, and yeah, it's our understanding that that'll be the case for each of the parcels. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Piper.
Sorry, so I remembered now. The point was obviously that there will be RSL housing to be delivered as well. So that obviously all adds into the trajectory. Yes, but I think they all will be just doing their own work, and I think that's they're well experienced at this sort of size. And when it looks like a large parcel, but when you've broken it down into the 4, they are all achievable, and they will. The ambition of all of the developers is to get going on this site as soon as possible and deliver as quickly as possible for their own sakes as well as that of the council.
And is a because Stone Bond would effectively beyond year 2, Stone Bond would have been complete, because I think there's a very small element, I think you said. Or nearly complete. So the majority of that peak would be delivered by the 3 house builders. And you said Crew Days would be 80 dwellings per annum delivery. Yes. And I think Countryside confirmed that would also be what they were looking at. Is that correct? Yeah. And obviously we've got Redrow on top of that. Yeah. Yeah. So what is the evidence from other sites that level of development could be that level of completions could be met, although it's a big site, but within effectively the same market area, same geographical location? Where is the evidence from other sites that those figures could be achieved? Oh, okay. So Mr. Glossop mentioned his sites earlier. I mean, we can provide this to you, sir, if you want, but certainly the numbers from Crow Days come from a site of comparable size at Didcot, where I will say, obviously, there are multiple house builders delivering at the same time. So they have a trajectory, they have a delivery rate of 50, 80 units going forward, because that fulfills their sales ability on that site. So in that sense, that it is comparable. And then obviously Mr. Glossop, from his point of view, from more local sites, but equally of equal size and comparability as to what they can provide. But if you want it, so we can actually submit it into the examination. Thank you. Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. Just to add to what Ms. Piper was said there, clearly, in addition, we've got a huge pent-up demand within the borough. It's a Greenbelt authority, as we've heard numerous times in the last couple of weeks. It's heavily constrained from a policy perspective. The plan is considerably out of date, and as on that basis, that there's a very strong demand and a very acute need for housing to be provided as soon as possible, and that factored into Countryside's experience within the broader locality in areas where supply has not been as constrained, yet the market still has been able to absorb a greater rate of development than, as we mentioned earlier, as per what we consider to be a conservative estimate here.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingworth. Mr. Stevens, please.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of points on delivery, and just, I suppose, just a sense of caution to be applied. Maybe we know there is a phasing plan to be agreed with the council. That's obviously pertinent to trajectory and delivery rates. And the key element, I think, probably as part of that will be the timing of delivery of the primary school, and how quickly that can be delivered to ensure that those dwellings are serviced in terms of primary education. So I think we would just urge a degree of caution about being too optimistic about the delivery rates on this site in that context. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Piper.
Thank you, sir. Just on that, clearly, as I said before, there will be elements of housing on this scheme to provide a significant proportion of those children for the primary school. It has got early years on it as well, and so it's a sort of a through school idea. But so that will definitely be within the phasing. So obviously there will be an element of housing that gets away quickly without the need for that school to be provided on site. We've already started the discussions with the county as part of this process, which will obviously continue. And we've also done a substantial amount of work looking at where the site can be delivered. And although that is expressed very broadly as an area of search on the plan that's attached to the Statement of Common Ground, there has been a lot of work done to consider where it is best placed. So actually, and so for example, there were about 8 area of search, covers about 2 now. So, and obviously we know what the criteria are for the school to be delivered and how they want it to look. And so that is very much part of a parallel discussion we'll be having all the way through this process, not just pre-app, not just through the application, but obviously for into the 106 and how we deliver it and how it's phased. I would say, as far as the school is concerned, it is not just for this development. 825 homes will not fulfil a 2-form entry primary school. So there are other developments going up from R03 to R19. All of those are included with which will contribute to this school, obviously financially, but also in terms of child generation.
Thank you. I've got a question about schools, so it's very timely. So in relation to the development, and what you've just explained, Ms. Piper, is very helpful. What is the expectation, do you know, of the county council in respect of when that school would be required to be provided on site? Have discussions reached that point? I've seen the appraisal document that's been attached in terms of site location, site search, etc., which is helpful. But is there anything about when that would be expected to be in place in order to accommodate the children from this site and indeed from other sites?
No, not yet, sir. Obviously, the way that Crodace is looking at it, because the school will be in Crodace's land, is that the site will be safeguarded from day one. So then it is up for the Education Authority and the DFE to take that forward when I guess funding comes forward. But there will obviously be a discussion about the number of units on this site that will help to trigger the requirement for the school. And certainly from a developer's point of view, it's something that's important to come forward at the right time, because obviously it helps then establish a community, but also sell the houses.
Thank you. Ms. Hung, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you, can see you. Thank you.
If I may assist, sir. Basically, we have had this discussion with Essex County Council, and the understanding is that the developers will contribute the amount of land required for the education facilities, and the approach that Essex County Council takes is that every development that qualify as major development. I think their threshold is about 20 dwellings. So every development that qualifies would trigger financial contributions for such facilities, and as Ms. Piper has explained to you, the facility on this site will serve a larger area that is in the same planning groups, and the other sites in the local plan would also contribute to that to these facilities as insofar as they are in the same planning group. So it would be sites from site R03 to site R19, and the delivery of the school, as I understand from education authority, is that sometimes they can, when they collect these financial contribution, they maintain the cash flow, so that when there is a need to forward fund such certain education facilities, they can do so, so that the financial, if say there is a shortfall in terms of financial contributions from certain sites, for example, they still have that financial abilities to forward fund certain education facilities. However, this said, the Essex County Council will have to confirm that. But in terms of the delivery of the facility on the site, we'll have to inform the conversations between the developers and Essex County Council, so that this facility on the site will be timely delivered, so that it serves the development as well as other sites in the plan.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Is there likely to be any form of restriction on progression on the site in terms of phases until the school is completed? Is that likely to be any hindrance to development to the site?
We don't think so, but we have understanding and agreement with the county council that the developers agree to provide the land for the school to be developed, and that is our agreement at this stage. And Miss Piper may assist more on their conversations with the Essex County Council.
Thank you, Miss Piper.
Thank you, sir. I think the point on this is that the 825 units on this site will not fill a two-form entry school. So the number of children generated is anticipated to fill just over a one-form entry school. So there will, I'm not anticipating any restriction in terms of this site being developed and coming forward in alignment with the school. So I say it will form very much part of the phasing discussions, but there, because it's not going to sort of overfill the school, I'm not anticipating any restrictions for this site at all.
Thank you. Can I now look at some of we've dealt with the school, and then looking at some of the other aspects of the requirements on the site. What evidence is there that a care home would be attracted to the site?
Thank you, Inspector. So I think, as we've mentioned in previous sessions, obviously we're talking about a strategic site, and for those strategic sites within the plan that we have obviously identified the requirement for care homes being potentially delivered. And obviously the reference to evidence in terms of the strategic housing market assessment part 2 obviously identifies where that need comes from, and certainly within that policy, I think we want to make sure that there's recognition of the need in the borough. Obviously there is a demand for those types of uses, and obviously to be incorporated into policy.
Thank you. And in terms of the promoters, have the promoters got anything to comment on in respect to that care home, in terms of my question about evidence about the care home?
Yes, sir. So Crowdays certainly have been approached by a number of providers that are keen to go. I think it goes back to Mr. Hollingsworth's point about the lack of provision in the past for all types of housing in this area. I think there is pent up requirement for any accommodation in this area, and that's definitely been shown by the interest from the care home providers to Crodace, at least.
Thank you. The policy requires 5% self-build and custom build across the entire allocation. How is it envisaged that would work and could be delivered?
Thank you, Inspector. So I think, as we've discussed again previously, I think with regards to the 5, obviously there is reference back. There is obviously other policy in the plan that refers to self and custom build housing, and again, obviously, it's been specifically identified in those strategic policies or strategic site policies, sorry, whereby the amount of land available would potentially accommodate that need. There are obviously recommended modifications by the council in F9A in terms of looking at a lower threshold overall in terms of sites it would apply to be in line with the demand that we've got on our register. But in terms of the, I think we've discussed it previously, but obviously the potential maybe for accommodating a more flexible approach in respect of timeframes at which that would apply, recognising that if that doesn't come forward, there would need to be a clause applied to that potentially.
But there would still be a requirement on the site, but it might be subject to some qualification.
Yes.
Do any of the site promoters wish to make a comment on that? Ms. Piper.
Thank you, sir. Just a small point. You'll see in our hearing statement that we would quite like just a little bit of extra wording onto 1D of the policy R03, which just basically says subject to supporting evidence available at the time. Obviously, we are looking at an 8-year build out, and things might change as we go through that. So I think that added wording would just allow for the flexibility that may come, although it is understood from the council's evidence that there is a requirement for both self-build and custom build.
And Mr. Coulter, what is the council's position in relation to that suggestion?
So perhaps I can take this on. I think the requirement has to remain a requirement. And if there's to be any adjustment to that, something which needs to be considered at the time. But we have a duty to provide self-build. And I think it would be wrong for us to start to dilute the means of meeting the requirement as part of that duty at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Shadhaven.
So far as delivery of the self-build is concerned, having a strict requirement like that is essential. The way in which it's delivered in due course is a matter for the developers, and it's a matter which can be considered by the council as and when applications come in. So they may, for example, agree between themselves that there will be one site that delivers more than another, subject to whatever agreement they have in terms of sharing the responsibilities which the policy imposes. But at this stage, it would be very, very difficult and unnecessary, I suggest, to interrogate those issues too deeply, because the policy requirements are there. The simple question is, can they be met? And the answer is, on the basis of the evidence we have at the moment, they can be. If that changes in due course, then it's something which may become material in the determination of applications as they come forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shadhaven. Can I ask you about the employment provision, which is in AD? What is the evidence which would support a provision of employment on the site, and what evidence is there that this could be delivered?
Thank you, Inspector. So in terms of the overall evidence that supports the plan, it's referring back to the Economic Futures Report in terms of the overall demand and how that can be met. It obviously, again, in reference to the strategic policies for strategic sites, they obviously identify the same amounts of 2 hectares of employment land, recognising the potential for larger sites to bring forward elements of mixed use scheme, obviously being a residential-led scheme. The original submission of the sites, the element to the north of which is the countryside properties, did include potential provision for employment uses, and obviously I think in terms of their recent hearing statements that's slightly changed, but I think in terms of the principle of bringing forward employment generating uses, that would be something that we would see as being achievable on the site, but I'll test that Mr. Hollingworth will come in on the position from Countryside Properties.
Yes, please, Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. Just to confirm, don't object to the principle of employment land on the site. Employment land is deliverable on that site. It's a matter that has been considered through the council's HELA, for example, at site 158 in that evidence-based document, which looks at both residential and employment on that particular elliptical parcel to the north there. We do have concerns in respect of the policy, however. Firstly, in our view, it is too precise and inflexible. It refers to 2 hectares of employment land to be provided, and there is no qualification of that, or there's no reference to approximately, as there is with reference to other land take requirements. And so our concern is a decision maker could infer that it has to be exactly 2 hectares, and 1.9 wouldn't be acceptable, for example. So we do think it needs to have that additional flexibility there, particularly as I think if it's too precise, it does potentially shut down opportunities prematurely to look at what would be the most suitable form of employment development on site, both in terms of design and in respect to a potential end user. Secondly, we consider that this element of the policy does need to be sufficiently flexible in terms of ensuring that both most efficient use of this site is made, and also with regard to the wider strategy to ensure that the local plan does or is imbued with sufficient flexibility to meet development needs with the ability to be able to respond to changing circumstances. And I think on that point, in our view, it's important to note that the HELA, in looking at site 158, identified it as suitable, available and achievable for employment, but also suitable and available and achievable for residential in whole. So there was no sort of distinction between the two. There's no kind of suggestion that the site may be suitable for only employment or only residential or certain parts of it. And as indeed, so you'll see that there's no specific element proposed to be allocated for employment. It's simply that employment land is required to be accommodated there. Separately, the Greenbelt assessment assessed both the sites, assessed site 158 both as a potential residential development site and employment site, and again, no difference between the two. And thirdly, there's nothing within the SA to suggest that the provision of a specific quantum of employment land on this site is in any way a determinant factor in its selection. So, put simply, the site is sustainable and deliverable for housing, and it's sustainable and deliverable for employment. So it's very different to some of the sites we discussed yesterday, which are clearly suitable for employment, but potentially not for housing. And we consider these points do need to be viewed in the context of the housing delivery position as per the local plan versus the employment land position. And yes, there clearly is a need for employment lands, but nevertheless the need for housing is evidently far more acute. And we're not saying policy should preclude the provision of employment land on the site. As I said from the outset, it's accepted in principle, but we don't feel that it's sound in expressly requiring a certain provision. Simply, this wouldn't ensure the most effective and efficient use of the site in meeting the borough's development needs as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingworth. Mr. Quilter.
Yes, thank you. Oh, okay. So Mr. Shadow Ravens is just about to come in.
So, forgive me, I thought my hand was raised, but it obviously isn't.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, it's my fault. Just dealing with the policy wording for the moment. I would be happy, I'm sure we would be happy to use the same formulation for the provision of employment land as being around 2 hectares. There's nothing wrong with that. The calculation, the borough's calculation of its employment land supply includes the 2 hectares which is being promoted here as part of the plan. So it would be wrong, actually, to take it out. Moreover, the housing numbers which are postulated for this site take into account or predicate that the site will also deliver land for employment purposes. So it would be wrong to water down this requirement or give the opportunity in due course for the requirement to be ignored altogether. I think that's all I need to say on that.
Thank you. Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, sir. I think just to stress, we're not suggesting there should be no requirement for employment land. And I am grateful for Mr. Shadow Even's confirmation that the council will look at introducing the necessary flexibility within the policy, and would be obviously keen to look at that very carefully. But I think the point remains that we are a Greenbelt authority. We're looking at releasing Greenbelt under exceptional circumstances. In our view, it is incumbent upon the local plan to look at what the most efficient use of those sites would be. But I think that ultimately it's going to come down to the detailed nature of any wording as proposed through main modifications by the council in respect to this element of the policy. But I think we're broadly on the same page with the council now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. This employment would by its nature sit cheek by jowl with housing. The policy doesn't specify any particular type of employment. Should it?
I think in terms, obviously, if we're concerned about if this is the point you're asking, apologies if I got this wrong, but I understand it's the compatibility between them. Obviously, we have other policies in the plan which would cover that situation in terms of any making sure that they're compatible developments. So I think our view is that obviously, particularly the size that obviously we're talking about here, that's not necessarily going to lead to large-scale employment uses like we're looking at, for example, down at the Brentwood Enterprise Park. We are talking about much more complementary employment uses that would take place. So our view is it would be sensible to keep it in as more flexible as the way it's worded.
Does at the moment there is the policy just says employment, and there is nothing in the supporting text to the policy which would give some clarity to the kind of considerations which you've just alluded to, Mr. Quilter. I'm wondering whether there should be some clarity brought to that.
So yeah, I think there ought to be some clarity there. You're right. I think the supporting text ought to say something about the employment element of the policy and make it clear that whatever employment goes on there ought to be compatible with the residential uses taking place.
Thank you. And in respect of that employment, which I think with the master planning and, well, there's an expectation that it will be on that part of the site. How does that affect the housing delivery that Mr. Hollingworth you've referred to earlier? Does one, the resolving where on the site that would go, and to the land take that would be involved, does that have an impact upon the delivery of housing that you said that Countryside could meet early on in the development?
Broadly, no. So the current iterations of the master plan that we've contributed to, we allow for those 2 hectares of employment land at the moment, approximately. As you'd imagine, this isn't a detailed layout at this stage, so we're looking at it in broad terms. And I think crucially related to this point, we are able to provide separate access points to both the employment elements and the residential elements. And so, in fact, any kind of outstanding queries around the precise quantum of employment land versus residential won't actually impact on the delivery of the residential on site. I think clearly, if the employment land were to be slightly reduced, then there's potential for some additional overall quantum of residential. And vice versa as well, if that employment land ultimately was to be slightly larger, which we don't envisage for the reasons I set out earlier. But yeah, in broad terms, no, they're quite distinct. So,
thank you. It is 11:05, and I don't have many more questions on this site. I can proceed, and we can have a break after we've dealt with this site, unless anyone is desperate for a break.
No, that makes a lot of sense, sir.
Okay. Could I ask about the school playing field? And there's been an objection from Sport England, which the council is now proposing, I think, to wording that would resolve that. You just tell me a little bit about that, Mr. Quilter, and does that indeed resolve the objection from Sport England?
I'll let my colleague, Ms. Pearson, just come in to answer, if that's okay.
Morning, inspectors. Yeah, so the wording that you see in paragraph 15 of our response to the MIQs, that was in discussion with Sport England following the concept plan that's been provided by the developers. So you'll notice that there is a second version of the Statement of Common Ground with Sport England in F69P, which at that point is where it's been addressed that all remaining objections have been resolved.
Thank you. The master plan shows an area of ancient woodland running across the site, and I'm just interested to know whether that is the local wildlife site, Arnold's Wood, that is referred to in the policy. I believe Arnold's Wood extends or is on the other side of the railway as well, but is this the area of ancient woodland which the criteria BI would refer to?
Yes, that's correct, Inspector. Yeah, so you're correct. It does extend, I believe, over both parts of the railway line. It obviously was intersected by that many years ago, probably hundreds of years ago when that was built. But yeah, that's certainly the same name, but the same part of the woodland.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions on this site. Mrs. Wright, have you got any questions?
No, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Ms. Webster? You had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I'm very sorry. My website cut out a little bit when you were talking about which site you were talking about. But you mentioned playing fields, and so Could you confirm which site we're talking about?
We're still on land north of Shenfield. We're talking about the
Oh, we
Shenfield
are.
School
Good.
playing fields, yes.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you then.
Thank you. No, we will come on to Priest Lane after the break. So we're going. If you heard me, I did ask about break. So we're now finished on this site. So we will take a break and then we'll come back to the site, Ms. Webster, that I think you're interested in more. So it's now 10 past 11. So if we take a break and resume at 11:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. If there's anyone here from the earlier session who doesn't need to stay, then please feel free to go. We have dealt with the north of Shenfield site now. So we'll turn to R19, land at Priest Lane, Shenfield. And can I ask Mr. Quilter to please introduce the site?
Thank you, Inspector. So yes, this is site R19, known as land at Priest Lane. It's proposed within the plan for 45 dwellings as per the addendum of focus changes. It is set in terms of its position within the town, so it's set within the urban area. It represents a greenfield site. It's off of, as obviously the name suggests, is land off of Priest Lane, and there's also Bishop's Walk that connects to one end of the site as well. It's situated along the main railway line on the southeastern boundary, and is surrounded by existing residential properties. So those that back onto it from Priest Lane and Bishop's Walk on the northern boundary. The northeastern boundary has St Andrew's Place. And then to the southwest, we've got the Hogarth Primary School and Endeavour School that adjoin the site as well. So in terms of its position within the town, it's in our view a very central location, nearby to existing services, train stations, so forth. I think that's probably the main bits, unless there's any questions on that.
Thank you. Can I first of all just establish the capacity, and I'm trying to understand the difference between the position of the council and the Ursuline Sisters, and perhaps you can help me here, because I think, if I understand right, that the Ursuline Sisters are saying that, perhaps I might be wrong, perhaps you can help me, about the care home. And is that the difference between the capacity of the site for housing between the council and the Ursuline Sisters?
No, so I think that the difference is there's two points there in terms of the quantum. I suppose also to be correct, it's not just the Ursuline Sisters bringing this site forward. Obviously, Mr. and Mrs. Fleming also own a piece of land adjoining Bishop's Walk, so just to make that clear. But in terms of the position of both parties, as I understand, and I'm happy for them to correct me, is that obviously the differences in terms of the quantum overall for the allocation. And there's some differences, different viewpoints raised by Mr. and Mrs. Fleming in respect of their portion of the site, but overall the proportion allocated, there's that view that should be a higher number. And then there's a further point in terms of actually, obviously the council's position on the policy as it's set out is that there's potential for a care home to be put forward on that site, but the view of the other parties or the site promoters is that would not be appropriate in this location.
So, can you just take me through then the how the capacity of the site has been arrived at, and see if I can understand whether there's differences, what those differences are between the council and the other parties.
Thank you, Inspector. This is, if I come in on this, and happy again for those on the call to add to what I may say. The council's position on this site in particular is similar to what we discussed a couple of days ago on the Blackmore sites. These sites, there were 4 of them, including Priest Lane, that were subject to consultation through the addendum of focus changes consultation that we undertook at the end of 2019. And that was the subject of proposed revisions to policies, including this site, on account of the local concern about the impacts of development, and the council wanting to reflect something of a way in which to reduce that concern in terms of the level of density that would be on site, thereby reducing the approximate number that we've set out within the policy, and reducing the number of homes that we see as appropriate coming forward on the site from what was in the original pre-submission local plan, and indeed considered through previous versions of the plan making process. And that again comes back to issues around reflection of local character, wanting to make sure that something is consistent with character. And I know from the previous session that we have said that we will provide something on the existing densities and character of areas in order to provide some context for whether there is a difference in terms of the number and level of housing that will come forward on the allocation here, as well as we've discussed already on the sites in Blackmore. So that really reflects the reason why the number is lower, and we understand from those promoting the site that a higher number could be achieved. I think you may be on mute, Inspector.
Sorry. Mr. Fleming, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's really to do with the how the numbers, how it was decided to cut down on the numbers. I don't think there's really been any justifiable evidence to show how it's been taken down from 95 to 75 to 45, other than the saying there was a lot of reps against it. And I don't know how how these have been looked at to really sort of test the strength of the arguments.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. I'll bring Mr. Dagg in here, and then we'll go back to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fleming is quite correct. The Ursuline sisters, my and Mr. Gevier's clients, are on exactly the same in exactly the same position as Mr. Fleming. That we note the way in which the numbers suggested for this site have declined. I think I'm right in saying that in the last 3 years, the numbers have gone down from 95 to 75, which of course was the position in the original Reg 19 submission, to 45, with the suggested changes, the focus changes. We share Mr. Fleming's position on this, that we don't understand where the justification is, other than, as has been fairly said by Mr. Quilter, that there's been a great deal of local concern. Now, I'm sure that Ms. Webster will speak to that, and we note that there is, of course, concern. We're very well aware of the local concern about the development of the site as such, and about the numbers which would be put on the site. But we say there is no technical justification for the reduction in numbers to 45. And essentially, there are 3 points. The first point, picking up again on what has been said by Mr. Fleming, that there isn't really any firm evidence on this. It falls into 2 parts. So, first, in terms of impact on character, it's self-evident when one looks at the size of this site, and one looks at a proposal for a capacity of 45, that one would be dealing with a really very low density development on the site. And we say that that's not justifiable in terms of impact on local character. We say that a more conventional density, modern standard conventional density for a suburban site like this would yield at least 75. And we say, in fact, the site would take 100. Of course, I'm putting the Ursuline sisters land and Mr. Fleming's, the Fleming family land together. But we think around 100 is right in terms of allocation, because that would produce a development which would be entirely in character with the surroundings of Peace Lane and the adjoining areas. The second point is that local residents, quite understandably, have expressed great concern about traffic impact and about how the development of this site and the traffic generated would impact on the network. Well, obviously, we've looked at that carefully. We've noted very much what the authority has to say in its up-to-date transport assessment. The short point is this, that we agree with the authority that there isn't any evidence to demonstrate that there would be a severe impact on the functioning of the network as a result of the development of this site by 100 units. In fact, we commissioned some time ago a study by Waterworth, recognised highway consultants, using a suggested figure of 130 units for the site. And Waterworth came back with an assessment that there would not be a significant effect on any of the main junctions in the area. There's a particular concern, and one understands it, on the part of local residents with the Priest's Lane Middleton Hall Lane junction, which is before you get to the traffic light controlled junction on Ingrave Road, which is one of the main junctions considered in the authority's TA. Well, we put the impact on that junction at both AM and PM. I'm sorry, the junction at Middleton Hall Lane and Priest's Lane. We put the impact on that junction at about 3.3%, which obviously is nowhere near the severe impact that is the criterion in NPPF. So those are our first 2 points. The first point is the character point. The second point is the highways impact point, the traffic impact point. The third point, of course, is very important for the inspectors, and that is how a reduction of capacity on this site to 45 from the original 75 and far below what we consider appropriate, and I suspect Mr. Fleming also considers appropriate for the overall site of about 100. And that, of course, is the conflict with national policy in Part 11 of the NPPF. This reduction to 45 units really can't stand in relation to national policy making best use of land, and in particular paragraphs 122 and 123 of the NPPF. Given the pressing need for further housing land in Brentwood, I mean, clearly the policy in 123 of the NPPF is engaged. So that's our position, those 3 points.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. I'm going to bring Miss Webster in here, but Mr. Fleming, your hand is up. Is Mr. Fleming, you're on mute. Have you got anything to add to what you just said before I bring Miss Webster in?
Yeah, I think we're just trying to differentiate ourselves from the main parts. I mean, we were just looking at Site 178, which is the extension of Bishop's Walk. The density, to be in line with the local character, 45 houses gives you less density than is there at the moment. I think, and we've already been told that just continuing along with the same density would not be in accordance with current thinking. You know, you want higher numbers. But I mean, to be in character, you'd have to, you could easily just get 9 houses continuing along in similar style. So as I'm saying, just trying not to get tied in with the idea of 100 houses. We're just looking at a small development.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Miss Webster.
Thanks, sir. So to talk about the density, we made representations as one of the local groups because the original density that was proposed was very much in excess of the local area. It's incorrect to say that 100 houses would be more in line with the local area. That's incorrect. Also, the report, as I understand, that was commissioned by the Ursuline Sisters ignored the fact that some of the land, as we were told by the council, should be put aside to replace the fact that there is open urban space here, and that they would allow some remaining open urban space, which is another issue which I would like to talk about, but maybe not at this point. And that also the Endeavour School is requiring land to expand on. And my understanding was that the council was asking the landowners to provide part of that land for expansion of Endeavour School. So the calculation that was provided by Watermans would not have taken that into account. And therefore, they were using too large an area of space to calculate their density. I understand that the Waterman report actually stated a figure which is being used by the Ursuline figures and quoted it and regarded it as being an ambitious number, which was their original proposals for the site. And as I said, that even ignored the fact that not all the land could be used. Although the gentlemen have talked about a lack of evidence, we have actually provided quite a lot of evidence to the council with regard to the issues around road safety and accessibility. And I think one of the things that should be borne in mind is that when Bishop Walk was constructed, the original request was for 12 houses on that road, and that was rejected and reduced down to 5 houses following representations from the highways authorities that there was not the infrastructure or the road width or the capability to support 12 houses. The access that's being proposed at between 61 and 63 is a similar road that's not really much larger than Bishop Walk, so we would expect to have a similar concern. In fact, it actually has lower visibility and approaches Priest Lane at a much narrower part in the road. So in fact, it has other problems as well as, and we can discuss this later, the problem of creating a dangerous staggered junction, which is not a good road design. So if you were to look at those concerns, you would see there is actually quite significant evidence to show that a site that's capable of supporting the number of houses provided is not there. I would also say that, having had sight of the Waterman report, there are some assumptions there in their calculations which are incorrect. They have made beneficial assumptions to support the argument, but they do not actually meet with the regulations as required by the national guidelines for road safety. So that, I would say, there is actually a lot of evidence justifying a reduction in numbers, and that's before you even look at the infrastructure regarding sewerage, which is at capacity, the water, the electricity, all these problems, which it's a bit unclear how, given that there are currently all these infrastructure issues and there's a lot of wetness in this land. It's a very boggy piece of land and has not been considered for development before because of this wetness, why they now would argue that the evidence is there to support such a large number.
Thank you, Ms Webster. Can I bring the council in, please? Mr Drain looks like he might be poised to speak.
Yes, I note Mr Johnson's hands up, which I suspect is regarding the points made on access, so I will leave that for Mr Johnson to pick up in a moment. I think I don't have very much more to add other than to support certainly what Ms Webster has referred to in terms of the policy requirements around allowing for Endeavour School expansion and the provision of open space on the site, taking account of what is there at the moment, as we've said in terms of the description of the site and urban open space designation in the current local plan, albeit we note that that is open space whilst designated that is not open to the public, and I'm sure site promoters can provide more information about its use and the way that it is used now and has been used in the past, and how that relates to other representations that we've received. I think that the council is aware of the fact that the levels of density that is being proposed here is lower than what can be achieved. But I think this is the point that comes back to what the council is trying to do, is to reflect some of that concern that local residents have about the impacts of development and the way in which character will be affected by new development in this location. And indeed, I know a number of the residents in Priest Lane have concerns about the role of the lane itself, the windy nature, the lack of footpaths, such. We understand that development can be provided for to safely provide access arrangements and highways provision in terms of pavements and such as to best facilitate growth. But all the same, it is a limited lane. There's limitations on that lane itself and the way that it functions, the way that land ownerships go all the way up to the road, for instance. So there's no ability for pavements to be provided, that type of thing. So we appreciate the limitations that there are here, I think, is the point that the council is trying to make, and so have tried to reflect that by reducing the number of dwellings that could come forward on the site. We also, I just add, we also recognise, in terms of Mr. Fleming's point, about the way in which the site, as we've set out in terms of the description, is made up of two land ownerships. So clearly, from Mr. Fleming's perspective, talking about the smaller land ownership that comes directly off Bishop's Walk, I don't think that there's a particular restriction on the level of development that can come forward as part of that. And indeed, what I'm sure Mr. Johnston will refer to in terms of the appropriateness of access there, and then the Ursuline Sisters site being the main site, the larger site that would come directly off Priest Lane. In itself, the reason that we've linked those two sites together, we feel it's perfectly appropriate to do that rather than having two separate allocations, because we want to make sure that growth in this area relates to the wider site and the wider area appropriately, as well as providing for the school expansion and open space facilities that would be required across from both sites.
Thank you, Mr. Drain. Mr. Johnson, please.
Thank you, Inspector. Good morning. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, about the site access. The site access off Priest Lane, I have been down there and a couple of times, 3 or 4 times, and a site access that complies with modern highway standards does look achievable. So hence we have not, registered any objection to the proposal for the access off Priest Lane. It's wide enough as well to comply with the Essex Design Guide, and I've seen that on drawings and such like. Where I probably agree with Miss Webster is on Priest Lane itself and the impact of the development. So I saw the Waterman report, and the Waterman report I think was 2 or 3 years ago. I haven't got it to hand, but I think it significantly underestimated the impact of, I think it assessed 100, 120 odd dwellings. And I think it significantly underestimated the delay that's currently there on that link, on the approach to Middleton Hall Lane. I think part of the problem you've got along there is you've got all the schools basically, Brentwood School, you've got the Hogarth Primary School, the Endeavour School, and that all creates a heavy demand along there. It's also just happens to be a very convenient rat run between Shenfield and Brentwood. So I think the modelling that was in the Waterman report did not satisfactorily model the base case, shall we say, and so that hence they underestimated the impact that the 100 or 120, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many they assessed, but that's why, I think from a highway point of view we thought it was more appropriate that the numbers were reduced on the site.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So to be clear then, that the County Council did have no objection to the 70 units?
Well, first of all, what I would say is we're not going to, it's not for us to tell the council where to put their development, obviously. But we would obviously look at it in more, in greater detail if a planning application came forward. We've had concerns about the site, but we've expressed that in the past. But at 70, that was what was on the plan, and we thought maybe 70 could be achieved if the suitable sustainable measures and were accompanying the application, etc. But to say when it got reduced again, let's say we welcomed it.
I'm sorry, 75 was the.
Excuse me, 75, yeah.
was the figure. But so the position, as you understand it, is that there is no technical highways reason why more than 45 could not be accommodated on the site.
In terms of access, no, we don't have a problem with the access.
And in terms of impact upon the impact on highway network.
Impact on highway network, we would have concerns. We would have to be convinced. Let's put it that way.
But there's no highway safety issue.
No.
So impact on network would be about
the severity of the
flow.
Efficiency. Yeah, highway efficiency.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that the road access at Bishop Walk is satisfactory for further extension. It was designed as such in conjunction with the planners who required 90-metre sight lines down Priest Lane. As far as the open space is concerned, it's never been playing field, it's not overlooked, and there's no public access, so it doesn't fit any of the definitions of open space that are used. And it's not boggy ground. I don't know where that idea's come from. It must be the other side of the hedge in the Oceanline land, but it's not our land at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming. Mr. Govia.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to clarify a couple of matters on the Waterman's report in particular. Undertaken by Waterman's, instructed by the Oceanline Sisters, it's considered the physical constraints of the access, the existing access, on the basis of a scheme of 130 dwellings. It concluded that physically an access is achievable there on the land within the control of the owner, and also delivering the required visibility space. So that is all information that's been shared with the council previously. The whole report has gone to the council along with that technical drawing. So that's that matter. The other thing is that Mr. Johnson did question the findings of our report, and perhaps I think he said this, it's underestimated the current experiences of the road. Just to clarify, this was a properly independent and professionally carried out report which undertook the necessary survey work on the ground, as well as obviously reference to data that's available in reaching its conclusions. So once again, on the basis of 130 dwellings, so more than is currently being put forward, significantly more is being proposed by the council, and more than we have now put at the around 100 mark. So just wanted to sort of just come back slightly on Mr. Johnson's point there, which questioned the accuracy of the report that was shared with all parties.
Thank you, Mr. Gogo. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnston.
Excuse me, I failed again with the mute. Yeah, I was just to come back very quickly that every transport assessment we see is commissioned by developers, but they are an independent organisation. In 99% of them, probably 100% of them, they all say that there won't be a severe impact on the network. But we have to take that with a pinch of salt. We have to take our view, which is a truly independent view.
Thank you. Mr. Govey, your hand is up. Was that from before?
Yes, apologies. I failed to put it down. I have done so now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dagg.
Yes, thank you. So, of course, I note what Mr. Johnson says. He has an appropriate level of highway authority cynicism with regard to developers' transport assessments. However, can I just underline that what was commissioned by the Ursuline Sisters through JTS, which has been spoken to, of course, by Mr. Govey. I won't repeat what Mr. Govey said in 2017. That was based on 130 units. Now, of course, we have the overall transport assessment commissioned by the authority. The test has to be, would 75, which was the original submission figure for overall units on the site, on the allocation, or as we have suggested, 100, is that likely to cause a severe effect? Given that, of course, everybody recognises, anybody who knows this part of Brentwood and anybody who's, of course, studied the literature knows, that the schools give rise to a good deal of congestion in the area. We all recognise that. The question is, to what extent would development of this site by 75 or 100 units contribute in any significant way to the congestion in the network? Well, we say, yes, of course there'll be an effect, but we say it's unlikely to be a significant effect. And of course, for you as inspectors, you have to balance that impact on the network with the obvious, we would say, obvious intrinsic attractions of allocating this site. We're not, of course, in any difference with the authority on allocation in principle, of course. But it just seems to us that allocating the site for only, I underline only, 45 units would be an error, having regard to national policy and having regard to Brentwood's housing needs. Can I, on a separate point, just agree with what Mr. Fleming has been saying? It hasn't been covered yet as far as we're concerned, but I ought to just cover it. So far as the separate development of the Fleming's land is concerned, we have no difference with that so far as the Ursuline Sisters are concerned. It really speaks for itself in layout terms. Bishop's Walk can be extended. We, in our draft layouts that obviously we have prepared to test out numbers, we've allowed for about 9 units on the Fleming's land, and that's the number which Mr. Fleming mentioned. So we don't have any differences with the Flemings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Webster, please.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid my Wi-Fi did cut out, so I missed some of the comments that were discussed about the highway. So I apologise if I'm going to repeat things or address things which have already been discussed. On the road access, I understand that the engineer may have had a look. However, I think you did refer already to the fact that Priest Lane itself is not really an ideally designed road. In fact, it sort of predates the idea of town planning. If you were to try to build, it is regarded by Essex as one of the main distributed roads through the town, but if you were to try and build the road like that now, you would not get permission. It would not be acceptable. It is too narrow in places for the level of traffic it is supposed to take. And at this particular junction, access point, it is again a very narrow part. There is, as already been identified, limited pavements, being in this particular stretch of the road only one pavement which switches sides and is in places only 1 metre wide, which is less than the 1.5 metres which is recommended. There is a consideration. I understand what the engineer said. However, I know that the survey that was undertaken did not look at the correct visibility lines because it understated them, because it should be using a longer distance, and it did not do that. So it's not clear that they have demonstrated there is visibility, and I'm not sure whether the engineer actually checked the correct visibility lines, as 30 miles an hour is not the limit that is required to be used. It should be the 85th percentile, which from traffic surveys we know that this road reaches quite a high speeds due to, effectively, we have the dual problem of very, very high congestion and traffic queues past these accesses in the mornings, but then at other times we have quite a problem with speeding traffic and people crossing the centre line. We ourselves in this road have seen a number of accidents. We have regular mini collisions because witnessed by the number of wing mirrors and hubcaps that we have to remove from our driveways. So I am not convinced that any evidence really has been provided that addresses our concerns as to the safety position, nor of the fact that actually maintenance may be tricky. Maintenance vehicles such as waste disposal trucks, etc., may struggle, as the access in and out of the site is a sharp right angle into Priest Lane, and nor has anybody, I think, addressed the concern over a left-right stagger, which is not deemed a very safe design on a road like this, especially when combined with a nearby left-right stagger. So I don't really think that it has been fully addressed as the road safety concerns. I still think that there is an issue that the 100 houses that the Ursulines are pushing for is extremely ambitious and will create a problem. I would also say, I think I missed the comments about the junction analysis, but the survey that the council originally did, the traffic survey that addressed the signalled junction, junction 8, I think it is in the reports, which is at the top of Priest Lane, Middleton Hall Lane, Ongar Road, Ingrave Road and 7 Arches Road. That survey ignored completely the traffic along Priest Lane in trying to establish whether or not the junction was working effectively. Ignoring Priest Lane, it was working at just under capacity. If you were to stick in the long queues of traffic which are accessing the traffic, that junction from Priest Lane, it would go way over capacity. And in fact, in the original traffic surveys, it was demonstrated that the junction would go over capacity. That was changed as a result of a modification in updated information. However, the updated information was taken from a planning application by Brentwood School. This was undertaken in May as compared to November, which obviously there are seasonal differences. In particular, the fact that that was during the school study period. So we had 2 years of schools, of each of the schools, and you're talking about Ursuline, Brentwood School, also Brentwood County High, and any of the other schools that were not travelling. And as a result, it reduced the traffic numbers by 11%. This was not best practice and should not have been undertaken. It was clear that when all the other traffic numbers were going up, the idea that this traffic junction could be going down by 11% was incorrect and should have been examined to find the causes why. And in fact, if you were to look at the PM figures, you will see that it is not consistent with the PM figures. So in fact, all the traffic surveys demonstrate that the signal junction at junction 8 will go over capacity. And while I understand that maybe the survey said this is only 3%, 3% on an overcapacity junction is still too much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Mr. Shardavian, you had your hand up.
I did. Assuming that everyone's contribution has come to an end, I just want to address the issue of process, if I may, because I'm concerned about whatever the merits of the reduction. I'm concerned that we approach this policy consistently with that of others, including Blackmore. And the requirements of paragraphs 122 and 123 of the MPPF, which requires a robust examination or robust testing of the issue whether or not land is being used efficiently, particularly in a borough which is a green belt borough, and there is a shortage of opportunities. So just in terms of process, without actually making any comment about the merits of any of the parties' positions, including the council's, I'm going to suggest that we provide you and your colleagues, sir, the same information as was required in relation to Blackmore, by reference to the criteria contained in paragraphs 122 and 123, so we can ensure both consistency and robustness of decision making, more importantly to assist you in that process. So.
Thank you very much. That would be very helpful, Mr. Shadow-Davian. And in terms of timescale, is that on the same timescale as the Blackmore notes?
The answer is yes.
Thank you. Can I look at the trajectory, and can the council please take me to what is now its position on the trajectory, and I'll take it from there. What should I be looking at? Is it the statement of common ground, or is it the trajectory as submitted previously?
Thank you, Inspector. So yes, the most up-to-date position is set out within the statement of common ground. Obviously, within that statement of common ground, it sets out the position of the council in terms of a slight change in respect of the 45 units coming forward on 2022-23, as opposed to 2021, as shown in the F26 document.
So, leaving aside the merits of the numbers for now, what is the evidence that would support units of that scale being delivered? Well, what is the evidence that supports a site start being made on a site in order to deliver housing in 22-23? And in that, I'd like to understand whether there is a house builder on board, etc.
I mean, from our perspective, obviously, we feel that there's enough lead-in time there for an application, but I think I would leave it to Mr. Dagg and Mr. Fleming potentially in terms of obviously updating their respective positions. Obviously, with respect to the Ursuline land, they're obviously a slightly larger parcel. As I understand it, they have been in conversation with developers, but I don't want to intrude on ground I'm not obviously completely aware of.
Mr. Dagg?
Yes, sir. I think probably this is more Mr. Govier's territory than mine. But can I just make these observations without wanting to intrude on Mr. Fleming's area of concern? Obviously, Mr. Fleming's parcel, which we're in agreement with his estimate there that about 9 units could go in there. I mean that there would be substantial detached houses on our estimation of those 9 units. That's a simple, straightforward development for a small, nimble developer. Obviously, we don't know what discussions Mr. Fleming's had with developers, but one would have thought that would be an attractive, straightforward scheme to undertake. So far as our site is concerned, obviously, we haven't had, as I understand it, in detail discussions with developers because, of course, everything has been pending this examination and settling the overall numbers. But we are quite well advanced with regard to the preparatory work. As you'll have gathered, we've had a transport assessment carried out, noting what Mr. Johnson has had to say in his comments about it, but we've done the basic work, we say, so far as transport assessment is concerned, but also, very importantly, we've looked at the drainage position with regard to the site. The basic work has all been done on that. We've done a flood risk assessment. We've looked at the sustainable drainage strategy for the site, and of its nature, the Ursuline Sisters land is a straightforward development site. It's not completely level. It does fall away down to the southeast, but it doesn't have any significant constraints at all. As you will have gathered, there are no major trees or there are no heritage features. In fact, there are no trees at all on the bulk of the site. The trees are concentrated along the edge of the railway line. So this is a straightforward site to develop, we would say. And of its nature, once the principal access is organised and will house the main access road into Essex Design Guide standards, well, obviously the site can be developed in fairly easy stages. But as to detail, I'd look to Mr. Govio for any further comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to clarify, the site is, we've had a lot of expressions of interest in it, but the site is in the ownership of the Ursuline Sisters. It's not under option, and we are not committed to anything or anyone at this stage. And as Mr. Dagg said, pending the reasonable conclusion here, we'd be looking at acting fairly quickly, and it would be a process of having to take the site to market. Acting on behalf of a charity, we are obliged and required to undertake a full marketing exercise to ensure the very best terms are achieved. And so it would not be a rapid process, I would say, but we would be moving quickly. And so I think just to sort of touch on the delivery figures and timing that's been agreed, it's a case that I believe that it is deliverable in the timeframe in the statement of common ground, assuming that we do have the adoption of this plan as programmed at the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Govio. Mr. Fleming. You're on mute, Mr. Fleming.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we've had lots of expressions of interest as well. Nothing firm at the moment. What we need to know is how many numbers we can put on the site and what sort of scheme we can put on there. We've had early discussions with the planners already, but we need to know, following this, what we can do. And after that, it's down to when the plan gets approved so that we can then kick off the planning application and design and tender and so on. I do have a concern about, in terms of deliverability, conditions that may apply. I mean, this is all assuming that this is a sort of a relatively straightforward scheme, which it should be, without any onerous planning conditions. I think one thing the council said was they pointed to a viability assessment and a table saying that proves that the schemes are viable. My reading of it is that in the assumptions that they assume that there's a density of 35 dph, which is a lot more than they're currently allowing here. So I think we just need to sort of to check to make sure, once we know how many numbers we've got, that it is financially viable anyway. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Can I just check, for the sake of understanding and clarity, that the figure that when the council's referred me to, the 45 within the statement of common ground, that includes, does it, Mr. Fleming's land?
So the allocation is for the entire area, so it does include both. I think obviously the point, again, notwithstanding obviously the further information to supply in terms of surrounding densities, obviously again the policy is for around, so it's not necessarily a set limit. It's obviously giving an approximation of what the appropriate densities could be, subject to compliance with other policies. But by all means, yes, the 45 does include all of the site.
Thank you. And does the council want to come back to what Mr. Dagg and anything Mr. Dagg and Mr. Fleming has said?
No, nothing further on that one, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just look at the relationship of the policy part A, and I'm looking at the focus change. The focus change only relates to the number of homes in part AA, doesn't it? So the council's focus change is 45 rather than 75, which was in the plan. But part B remains unchanged.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's correct.
So the policy that would then say the potential for the provision of a care home. What does that mean in terms of what the council expects to be provided on the site? Is the word potential sufficiently clear as to what can be delivered and expected to be delivered on the site?
So I think in terms of the F9A main modifications, I think the proposal was to amend that to, I think it was under MM 106, where it was looking at the inclusion of, or a change of wording, sorry, so around 45 new homes and a care home as by 40 bed spaces. I think in terms of the history of that policy, obviously the potential was, I think, reflective at the time of, again, probably going back to concerns about the potential impacts on the local area, and obviously the view that potentially the care home would have a lesser impact on the road network in terms of lesser movements that would be associated with such use. That was why there was the stipulation of potential as opposed to stipulation, but that's obviously subject to that change.
So essentially, the words "the potential for" has been excluded in the proposed model.
Right. So the council's position is that the 40-bed care home would sit alongside the housing units of around 45 units. And the position of Mr. Dagg, then, can I just understand what his client's position is in respect of that? Because your position is that you don't think that there is the policy should include provision for a care home.
Yes, that's right. I mean, our position is this: that we're not opposed to there being a care home on the land, but we doubt whether there really is, in market terms, a potential for a care home on the land. That's the way that we put it. If I can put it a little bit more loosely, were we to have our allocation at a satisfactory figure with the care home potential standing alongside it, if a developer of a care home developer came along to us and said, well, we're considering as we would think realistic, 70 to 80 bedroom care home on the land, would that be something that you'd be prepared to entertain? Well, I think our advice to our clients would be yes, certainly we would entertain that. I think where we are, and I'd ask Mr. Gavier just to confirm this from the commercial viewpoint, we have had contact with care home providers, and what we have gathered in contact from care home providers is that there are two difficulties. One, the specification of a 40 unit care home is unrealistic in present market terms, that would be too small to be viable as a care home in the present care home market. That's the first point. The second point is that this inevitably, because of the layout of the site and its relationship to the surroundings, this is not one of those sites that would give prominence to a care home development. And and we understand from care home developers, and it is JTS experience, and I must say it is also my experience, that care home providers generally like to have more prominent sites for their developers than would be possible here because of the intrinsic nature of the site. And there's a linked point that, of course, although this site in general terms for residential development is well located in relation to public transport and to services, it is not as close to local services as we understand that care home providers normally prefer. I think that sums up our points. I don't know, Mr. Govier, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, just to reinforce that, we proactively went out to the number of major care home providers without any limitations on numbers and so on, and just asked them the question: is this a site that you'd be interested in? Would this appeal to you in whole or part? It's obviously probably too big for one user. But yeah, the response back was exactly as Mr. Dagg explained, that its location is subprime in that it's too far, really. It's on the very edge of what is accessible in terms of town centre and the facilities, as well as its prominence being not high enough, being tucked away in there behind the houses of Priest Lane. So it was an exercise we've gone through, and it's an exercise that did not yield any strong interest at all. And just to go on to the second point, in terms of the numbers at 40, JTS, as John said, is absolutely right. Works with a number of care home providers of all different sort of nature, and 40 units is not commercially viable in most scenarios. You'd be looking at, as John indicated, somewhere north of 60, 70, 80, even up to 100 as being the critical mass before something becomes viable. So again, back to the point of a sort of a lack of evidence here to justify not only the suitability of the site for this, but also the actual numbers that have been put forward here in the plan. And just finally, I think as it was originally drafted, that point B you referred to earlier, potential for the provision of a care home. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach, not restricting it to the 40-bed element, but as John said, if someone came to our clients with that level of interest, then we would not be turning them away without speaking to them first. So just to clarify that position.
Mr. Dagger, your hand is up. Is that from before? Thank you. Can I turn to the council, please? And in the light of comments made by Mr. Govier, can I understand what is the evidence that would support a care home in this location, and also what is the evidence that would support a care home of 40 units?
Thank you, Inspector. I think coming back to the original point of trying to think about uses that could be brought forward that had minimal impacts, reflecting those concerns of local residents, was the original purpose of the option for a care home on the site. As we've tried to make policies more clear in terms of the modifications suggested at F9A, I can see how we've ended up in a position where we've perhaps in trying to do so, now made that unclear as to how that could be delivered from a market standpoint, as has been set out by the site promoters. I can only suggest that we have a look at this as part of thinking about, as we're going to do, the overall capacity of the site according to local character, and consider that issue.
I think that would be helpful, and I think that the wording as proposed to be modified, well, you're suggested, is very definitive in saying that around 45 homes and a care home. And my question would be, what if a care home cannot be provided? What happens then in terms of
understood.
In terms of this policy? So I think it's a helpful suggestion to go away and have a look at this and come back to us. Thank you, Mr. Jane. Question about the objections from Sport England, but I understand now that that is going to be resolved through payment of a financial sum. Can that be confirmed? Is that the position?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Webster?
Thank you. I just want to address the point about the playing fields. As you know, the history of this site has been predominantly, if you take the two sites together, predominantly it was a sports field used by a school and some football teams. I understand it was, for a long time, it's been reviewed a number of times about whether it should be a protected open urban space, and that's been maintained because Brentwood has not demonstrated a surplus amount of open urban spaces. And from looking at the documents that the council has put out, I haven't really seen that that has changed, that we have now a surplus. And while I understand about the point about a financial contribution, I want to make the point that a school's playing field would be very useful being near a school. And we have two schools that abut onto this joint site of land. Endeavour School, which is currently hoping to expand and doesn't have any land to expand into, and Hogarth School, which in order to expand had to build on its playing fields and is now currently operating at the capacity of the ratio of buildings to land. It would seem to me that making a financial contribution does not really equate with the provision of alternative facilities, which is the preferred option, I believe, when you are deciding to develop playing fields and surplus playing field land like that. And in our view, we think it's a wasted opportunity if this is released purely for housing development, when actually that open space, which is a dwindling number of open urban spaces in the Brentwood town centre, is to be lost altogether to housing development when you have two schools right next to it, which could utilise that land very beneficially for the community.
Thank you, Ms. Webster. Just on that point, can the council clarify that the policy amendment in terms of that financial sum requirement would meet the provisions of paragraph 97 of the framework?
Yes, Inspector, I can answer that. We've had ongoing conversations with Sport England, and through the Brentwood playing pitch strategy, which is document C4, you can see in table 5.22 that it was actually identified that the playing fields in that location were of very poor quality, and in consultation with the various sports clubs that use those fields, they opted not to use them due to the poor quality. And it was agreed within the steering group of all the sports clubs and Sport England that providing a financial contribution towards a new playing field or improvements to an existing playing field within the borough would be sufficient.
Thank you. I've got some hands up, please, and I don't know who was first. I apologise. Mr. Dagg is waving at me, so Mr. Dagg. And you're on mute, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Dagg. Can everyone else hear me?
My apologies. Sorry, I'm unmuted now. Yes, I think this will be a joint comment by myself and Mr. Govier. If I can just go first. I think Ms. Webster's misunderstanding the position that the Ursuline sisters take. And certainly our position in conjunction with the authority, may I say, we agreeing entirely with what Ms. Pearson has just said. I mean, our position on paragraph 97 of the NPPF is that there has been proper assessment so far as open space requirements are concerned, and a conclusion has been reached so far as this site is concerned. We're with the authority entirely on that. But as to the detail of what we suggest is appropriate in respect of the Ursuline Sisters land, first, we're committed to providing some land for playing field so far as the Endeavour School is concerned. The Ursuline Sisters are a charity. It's consistent with their charitable aims that they should assist the educational effort of the special school, the Endeavour Special School. We're very happy to provide for what I think will be playing field replacement land, because the Endeavour School needs space for its sixth form expansion, which will take its existing playing field, so it needs replacement playing field land. And we're happy to provide that. So that's the position so far as Endeavour School is concerned. So far as the general position with regard to contribution to open space elsewhere, well, the position of the Ursuline Sisters is quite straightforward. They're prepared to enter into obligations in the ordinary way to assist appropriate further open space provision in the borough. I hope, Mr. Govier, I've covered it.
Yes, absolutely right, John. Just to give the sort of finer detail with the Endeavour School, it is a gift, effectively, of land to the school from the charity, the Ursuline Sisters. Excuse me. A resolution has been given by the trustees to do that, and we're now in the process of agreeing heads of terms and so on that transfer. So that is something that's happened, that will happen, and will hopefully be completed this year to enable the Endeavour School to move on with its planned expansion to provide a sixth form. And you explained it exactly right. We'd be providing land which they'd effectively be using as a playing field, and then build on their existing open space, so that there's no net loss there. The other point, just to pick up on the comment made from the other school, the Hogarth School, we, as part of this, approached them directly in terms of their requirements, and they had recently undertaken some extension and other work, and it was confirmed to us that they had no need or interest to acquire any further land, and that their provisions were being met with their current site. So both respects, both educational purposes, what is being proposed and agreed is meeting their requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Govier. Mr. Dagg, just bear with me, Mr. Fleming. I know you've got your hand up. Can I ask a question about the Endeavour School land? So the land that would be made available for the Endeavour School land, whereabouts on the site is that? That is in the southern part of the area. In fact, if I can just mention, it's not germane to exactly what we're talking about at the moment, but I hope this is common ground with the authority. There is a slight error in the southern part of the allocation as shown at the moment. The Endeavour School land actually juts into the southern part of the overall allocation. If one just to imagine an extension of the Fleming family land, the area there adjacent is actually part of the Endeavour School at the moment. So there's a slight inaccuracy with regard to the boundaries. And what we're proposing is that land immediately adjacent to the existing Endeavour School land should be transferred to the Endeavour School. It's that area immediately adjacent. And how much land is that, Mr. Dagg?
I don't know if Mr. Govier's got the figure. I don't actually have the figure for that.
Yes, it is in our statement. It's 0.6 0.27 of a hectare, so 2,700 square meters. And we also, within our statement at Appendix 3, we did include a plan identifying the extent of that land. So I hope that's clear enough. It's an area that replicates their existing open space provision, which is what the area that they will need to extend into as part of their.
It's a like for like replacement.
It's like for like, yeah.
And that has been taken account of then in your assessments of capacity of the residual part of the site.
Yes, it has. I mentioned earlier that we've carried out, as you would expect, some preliminary layout analyses, and in fact, we did a layout analysis including 9 units, as I've mentioned, on the Fleming land and the Endeavour School land, which we've just referred to, the gift land for the Endeavour School, and also accommodation of an attenuation pond so far as the surface water drainage strategy is concerned, and we came out at, let me just double check, 95. We came out at 95 units on that layout analysis.
Thank you.
Sorry, just by a little bit more detail, that analysis was based entirely on 3-bedroom to 6-bedroom houses in terms
Correct.
of the house range. So obviously not pushing the boundaries of density and unit types that are there. I'd expect we'd probably be looking at a slightly more mixed provision, which could potentially increase those numbers.
And what we could do, sir, if you would like, Mr. Shadarivian very helpfully, and I endorse entirely what Mr. Shadarivian volunteered on behalf of the authority when he was referring to process and ensuring consistency with regard to the approach with regard to paragraphs 122 and 123 of the NPPF. I mean, obviously we'll have sight of that clarification, and through the programme officer, if it would be helpful to you, we could put you in a little note with our test layout attached so that you could actually see that. I don't know if that would be helpful.
I don't need that at this stage, Mr. Dagg, but we'll see the council's note.
Yes, well, I'm volunteering, so if you need clarification on that, we've got the material available.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming, you got your hand up, but can I just ask Mr. Drain, who I think was going to respond first, just what's in my mind, the issue that's been raised about the an error. Can the council please address that point?
I'll answer that one, Inspector. Thank you. So yes, I think we picked up on it slightly earlier on in other sessions when Mr. Fleming raised it. I think in matter 7A, site selection methodology. Obviously, we said we'll come on to it in this session, so happy to go into more detail. So yes, the boundaries do account for that land, and the reason for that is obviously, as Mr. Daggs explained, that there's going to be like-for-like replacement in terms of the land that the Endeavour School needs, so that'll be adjoining their current playing field, and obviously with that designation remaining, if the protected urban open space was to remain on that land which they wish to build the sixth form school on, obviously that would then become a restriction in terms of preventing them from potentially doing that. So obviously the reason for that removal is to allow for that expansion works to take place unhindered, basically, from that provision, recognising that the playing field space would be replaced. So I think from our position, we feel that's a justified part of the boundary, and also bearing in mind, obviously, the policy does mention specifically the need to provide for expansion for the Endeavour School, notwithstanding, obviously, that's obviously subject to the agreements that are taking place between the Ursuline Sisters and the Endeavour School, and would obviously state that the County Council has not specifically set that out as a requirement in the policy, but obviously the fact that that's able to happen and it obviously enables the school to expand to sixth form is considered to be justifiable.
Thank you, Mr. Quilter. I will turn to you now, Mr. Fleming, and that
Thank you very
might
much.
relate to that point. It may relate to another point, but please.
Right, a few points. I just want to correct a point of fact. There's a misunderstanding about the status of our land. It's never been playing fields. was originally set aside about 1935 for the London Orbital Road, and since the war it's been private garden. So it's not public open space. It was designated some years ago, but it's not. It doesn't fit the definitions anymore. It's not open to the public. It's not overlooked, and so on, as I've said before. There's a misunderstanding. I think it's because a lot of the documents that are used in evidence do highlight the whole area, saying playing fields. For example, we've just had the policy map R19 on page 26 of document A8. That does show the whole of the area, including the Endeavour School, as being playing fields. The wording in the middle says Ursuline School it says playing field. I think we need to have it sort of altered so that it says Ursuline School playing field in the top right, private land on our land, and Endeavour School playing field on the bottom corner, so that it does actually show 3 separate sites, 3 separate ownerships, and 3 different land uses. I think it's just sort of adding to any misunderstandings if it just sort of stays as the whole lot is shown as a playing field. I mean, we can alter up a map if needs be just to demonstrate that. The third point is that there is a requirement for financial contribution linked to the loss of playing field. I'm seeing this as just being, well, I'd just like to clarify really that this contribution is linked purely to site 044, because 178 has never been a playing field, so there's been no loss of playing field from our site. That's the points, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Degg, Mr. Govey, you've got your hands up. Is that from before?
Yeah, apologies for me.
Well, so what Mr. Fleming's said, as far as we're concerned, is correct.
Thank you. I want to draw this discussion on the site to a close, and I'd like to just ask if anybody's got any further points before I ask the council if they've got any final points. Okay, Mr. Govier. You're on mute, Mr. Govier.
Sorry, yes. One point that came to mind, unfortunately going back a little bit to our slightly earlier discussion on the highway situation with the land. If it's appropriate now, then I just wanted to make the point that the Highway Authority, in all stages of the draft local plan, so on the higher numbers, have supported proposal, and so the position now that we find ourselves in, where they are seemingly not supporting them and endorsing a 45, is a slight shift in position there. So I just sorry for stepping back probably an hour into our discussion, but I just wanted to make that point before we closed.
Thank you. Just turn to the council then. Is there anything that Ms. Webster?
Thank you. And I appreciate that we seem to be talking now about a different number than 95 houses. But I think all the discussion earlier that we had with representations was indicating the site really would struggle to take more than 45 houses because of a variety of problems. And I would like to reiterate, it seems that we seem to be an assumption that we're now talking about 95 houses, which I'm a little bit concerned about.
We're in. I'm hearing the evidence around the policy, and so I've been hearing the evidence. I just want to make sure that I have heard all the evidence. Can I turn to the council, please, if you've got any points you'd like to make?
No, that's fine. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, we will be providing further information in respect of the surrounding densities and density of the site and in respect to care home provision.
Thank you.
Can I just also, in terms of the point that Mr. Fleming raised, and it's helpful that he did, in terms of the point regarding whether the site is or isn't playing field space, the fact remains the site is designated in the existing local plan as protected urban open space. Obviously, there's a designation, regardless of obviously whether there is specific differences within that land. So from the point of view, obviously, of allocating the site, R19 that allows for that development to take place. So obviously, the contributions, regardless of who does make them, apply to the allocation in itself. So that may well be a matter obviously between the parties, but I think in terms of what our view is, that we're planning obviously for future needs and there's appropriate contributions required in terms of the mitigation. So that's just a point to raise.
Thank you. Mr. Dagg, is your hand up from before, or is there one final point? You're on mute.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm off mute now. Just very shortly, because it was just a loose end. I don't want to repeat anything that Mr. Govey has just said a minute or two ago about the traffic aspect. It was just that Ms. Webster, understandably, speaking for the local residents, was very concerned about the access. It was clarified for the county council by Mr. Johnson that he was satisfied that access from Priest's Lane for the Ursuline Sisters land could be safely arranged. I just wanted to say that because it hasn't been said, as a matter of detail, of course, Priest's Lane is a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit road. There are standards for visibility distances set out in the manual for streets, and we're entirely satisfied, and we understand the county council to be entirely satisfied, that we can lay out the access safely with proper visibility splays so far as Priest Lane is concerned.
Thank you. Mr. Webster, you've got your hand up. I do want to
I know you want to move on, but just on that point, if somebody can categorically say that they have demonstrated a 60-metre visibility display as required by the regulations, I'll be satisfied. But to this date, nobody has told me that. I've only ever seen a 43-metre, and that is not sufficient for this road if you follow the regulations. So I'd be quite happy if somebody would tell me that the visibility can be achieved at that level.
Right. What I'm going to invite Mr. Johnston to pick up that point. And then I'm just going to invite the council to, if they wish to say anything, and then I'm going to close the discussion. Mr. Johnson.
Just very briefly, the standard is 43 metres as per manual for streets for a 30-mile-an-hour limit. It's not 60 metres. Now, the 85th percentile that Ms. Webster was referring to earlier is only if they want to have if you want to have a relaxation of the standard, as it were. So, in other words, if they can't get 43 metres, they can go out and do a survey and see if actually the 85th percentile suggests that the speed is only actually 22 miles an hour along there, in which case you might have a reduction of that visibility display. However, they are completely complying with a 30-mile-an-hour limit as per manual for streets, which is 43 metres.
I don't wish to prolong this discussion on highway matters. I'm satisfied that from what I've heard on highway matters that I have enough evidence, and notwithstanding the additional information that is going to come forward from the council. So there are 3 hands up, but I'm not really hoping we can. I don't want to continue this discussion on highways. Mr. Govey, is your hand up? You've not spoken.
Sorry, mine was up. My mistake still.
Thank you,
Apologies.
Mr. Dagg. Mr. Dagg, your hand is up. Is that? You're on mute, Mr. Dagg. Thank you. Mr. Fleming.
Yeah, can I just repeat that we've got 90-metre sight lines on ours, so we should be perfectly safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming. Mr. Sherwood-Davian and Mr. Drain or Mr. Quilter, is there anything you'd like to say?
Absolutely nothing more. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions this morning. We will take a lunch break now and resume for those that are with us.
Sorry, Inspector, wasn't sorry, not to prolong anything, but you mentioned earlier you had a few questions in relation to the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Just
so,
quickly, in case you missed them, I appreciate there may not be any long questions. I don't want to miss anything of that session.
So involved in Priest Lane, I've forgotten about the. But just to seek clarification on the two other sites that have now got planning permission.
Yep.
That on Crescent Drive and on the Eagle and Child, the council are now asking us to modify the plan to withdraw those from the plan.
That's correct, yes, because they are now part of the permitted development that obviously it's accounted for in terms of our figures. So yeah, they're no longer an allocation.
Thank you. Mr. Dagg, your hand's up. And you're on mute, Mr. Dagg.
My apologies. I'll cancel the hands up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Coulter, for that. Okay, thank you everyone for your contributions, and we'll adjourn now for lunch and resume at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.